Annie, how are you?
I'm good, Michael. How are you?
Yeah, I believe you when you say that. It sounds like and it feels like life is good for you. So, congratulations on your book that you've introduced to the
Thank
world,
you.
and I'm excited to dive into it with you. But why do I feel that exuberance and that authenticity when you say I'm good? Where's that come from?
Well, I live in Connecticut and it's a really beautiful fall day here, crisp weather. The leaves are turning. I think that weather has a big impact on my mood, as it does for many people.
And did you grow up there? Did you grow up on the East Coast of the United States?
I did outside Philadelphia. So this is kind of my most favorite time of year.
Okay, cool. And then what was it like growing up? Just a quick pass. Give us a sense of what was the family like? What was the socioeconomic status about? What was the main conversations that you had around the dinner table?
Oh, such an interesting question. Well, I grew up in a middle class family. I was the kind of bookish nerd of the family, and I always had my nose in a book. My father actually, he was a social worker, but before that, he was a member of a religious order, the Christian Brothers, and so at some early point, I decided that religion was not for me. And so, but he and I had many spirited debates about theology and religion. Much to his credit, he didn't impose his views on me. It just became actually a way for us to connect. So I've always thought of those conversations as one of the foundations of my career as a writer and a thinker.
I love this. What is Christian Brotherhood? What is that about?
They're a teaching order, kind of like the Jesuits. So
Hmm.
they take vows of chastity and poverty and all that stuff, but they're out in the world teaching. And my father was joined when he was 19 and then left when he was 35 because he wanted to have a family. So my sister and I always said that we really needed to be good because dad left God for us.
Oh my, is that a
The
joke or is
pressure.
that for real? No, that's for real, isn't it?
There
Oh my
was a little
God.
feeling of that. Yeah, yeah,
Wow. Okay.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so, and then you have a spirit where you like to find ways to push back. Is that like the essence of the challenge relationship with your
Yes,
father? Hmm.
to ask questions. And I am grateful to my dad. He died about 8 years ago, but I'm grateful to him that my questions were not quashed. They were invited and, welcomed. Um, and I do think of myself as having a very, as I said, bookish kind of living in my head kind of childhood and young adulthood. And so the book that I wrote, The Extended Mind, is actually about coming out of your head and living in your body and being aware of the space you're in and your connections with other people. So I kind of think it was the book that I needed to write. It was like the things that I needed to teach myself.
Isn't that always the case?
Yeah, I think it is.
You know,
We write what we need to learn. Yeah, for sure.
when I first started 20 some years ago in being a psychologist, one of my mentors says to me, Mike, you realize that everything that you're going to need to work on is going to show up in the chair next to you or across from you. And so
Interesting.
like, yeah. And,
Interesting.
and it was a nod to the idea that in all of your relationships, professional or otherwise, you will see and experience triggers, and those
Yes.
triggers are yours. It's
Yes.
not, they might have brought them into the room, but that's your stuff now. And so don't be
Hmm.
confused.
Right.
You're a mess and you need to keep working. And
Hmm.
so,
Hmm.
yeah. So it sounds like this is one of your processes to take the early childhood bookworm experience, the questioning
Hmm.
of big ideas, and to
Hmm.
say, I kind of feel stuck in my head. And
Hmm.
what's this other part of this link between the mind and the body? Does that sound
Right.
close to being right?
That does. And I think, often we're drawn to the things that don't come naturally to us. And so that can create a challenge. It would be easier to stay with what feels comfortable. But I kept finding myself drawn as a science writer to these bodies of research that were about, no, we don't just think with our brains, we think with our bodies. No, it matters where you are. That affects how you think. And no, we don't just think with our own minds. And I've been a freelance writer for 25 years, which is a very solitary kind of occupation. And here I am writing about the joys of working in groups. So I think it's almost like a magnetic attraction to to all the things that make you a little bit uncomfortable. And you can either resist that or you can go with that and find out more.
So let's do something. I want to do a flyover really quickly about what we want to make sure we touch on. And I want to start with a differentiation first. And then I also want to, in between those two, the flyover and the differentiator, I want to understand, like, what does a successful life mean to you? And
Hmm.
so there's like this next little segment it will be those three parts. So on the first part here, what is the difference between the mind and the brain? And how have you
Mhm.
that's a loaded question. I think about
Mhm.
this a
Mhm.
lot. And
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
this is not like to get into a debate about anything, but I want to know
Mhm.
how you
Mhm.
think about the mind and the brain.
Right, right. Well, that's a great question because it gets right at the heart of this idea of the extended mind, which my book is built around. Because the conventional understanding is that mind and brain are identical, that they're contiguous, that the mind is the brain, that the mind is contained within the brain. And what the extended mind, the theory of the extended mind says is no, the mind is much bigger than that. The mind extends out from the brain through the body, below the neck and out into the world, our surroundings, our environment, and into the relationships that we have with other people. And that's where thinking is happening. That's where the magic is happening, not in here, but out here, and it's really, to me, profound and transformative kind of idea that can really change how you see yourself and others in the world.
So the brain is the tissue, and
Mm-hmm.
it's got chemistry and matter and electricity and a beautifully complicated interwoven network
Mm.
and more of an ecosystem than a network. And that's the brain. And the mind, you're saying, is more like the unified field, where it is a collective
Mm-hmm.
consciousness, where there's an individual aspect to it, as well as an invisible networked aspect to it. Do I
Mm-hmm.
hear that correctly?
Yes, and I think another important thing to
There's a
remember.
slight pause in there, so course
Well,
correct
I
it.
like that stuff about unified field. I mean, it's those aren't words
Mhm,
that I use, but
mhm,
I I think it's important to remember that the brain is a very limited and quirky and idiosyncratic organ. It's obviously a biological organ with all the limitations that come along with that. And it's an evolved organ that evolved to do things that are very different from what we ask of it today, to deal with all these abstract and conceptual kinds of ideas. So in order to meet the moment, to function in our modern world, the brain needs a lot of help. And that's where these outside the brain resources come in.
And you know what I really appreciate is that you've introduced an idea, um, which is really important, which is the brain has limits, and
Right.
the mental aspect of our life as well is not boundless with
Mm-hmm.
with
Mm-hmm.
with quote unquote energy. Like as a
Right.
resource, like both of them there's limitations to it. And so I'm really excited to dive into that with you as well,
Mm-hmm.
because I think
Mm-hmm.
that that's a really important, um, I don't want to say footnote because it's like the main thesis, but it sits
Mm-hmm.
underneath how we think about getting better and how we think about recovery and how we think about engagement, with things that are important to engage with. So it's
Yes.
foundational to me. And then quickly, like, what does success mean to you? Like just life
Mm-hmm.
success,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I've always found Sigmund Freud's formulation useful. He said love and work, those are the two things that matter. And to me, meaningful work and really rich, deep, authentic connections with other people. Those, keep it simple. I think those two things they're the foundations of my life. And I've been lucky enough to have them be the core of my life. And to me, that's what success is.
you know, um, I, when you're going down the path with Sigmund, I was like, oh boy, where's this going? Like, something,
Yeah.
like he was out there and he did some really interesting stuff. Most has been, from a scientific framework has been, it hasn't held up, id,
Mm-hmm,
ego,
mm-hmm,
superego.
mm-hmm,
But then the thinking and the philosophical opining was
mm-hmm,
brilliant
mm-hmm.
and game changing for the industry. So his place is duly noted. And if he would have known this study, and I've referenced this study all the time, I'm fascinated by it, but Harvard did a 75-year study studying fulfillment. And two of
Oh,
the key
right.
factors that you just mentioned came
Mm-hmm.
back as purpose is what they found was part of
Mm-hmm.
fulfillment. Answering the big questions in life was part of
Mm-hmm.
it, and meaningful relationships.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, pretty cool finding. And he was on it. And it sounds like you're on it as well.
Yeah, yeah. No,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of ways to say or to approach the same kind of core truths, and those three sound pretty good too. I like answering the big questions. I would certainly put that at the heart of my life as well.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Okay. And then, so on the flyover here, on this third part of this question, on the flyover, what do you want to make sure that we hit? Because there's so many ways I feel like you and I can go
Mm-hmm.
in this conversation. So, what
Mm-hmm.
would be the
Mm-hmm.
three big buckets, if you will, that would be
Hmm.
important for us to hit?
Mm-hmm. Well, just as an overall thing for your listeners to remember, I would want them to know that they have access right now to so many avenues and resources to think better, and that they may be constrained right now by a misunderstanding of how thinking works, and that there's a way to escape that conventional limitation and to take advantage of all these outside the brain resources that are really our heritage as human beings. They're really, it's our own culture and our own society that has placed these limits on us that tell us that the brain is what does all the work, and that the body has nothing to contribute to intelligent thinking, or that in our very individualistic culture that it's all about you, the individual, and not about what you can do with other people, or the idea that where you are doesn't really matter, that you should be able to function just the same outdoors or indoors, or in a place where you feel comfortable and empowered, or in a cubicle that is yours today and won't be yours tomorrow, that kind of thing. So mainly I would love for your listeners to understand that there's this whole world of potential out there that is already ours. We just kind of need to claim it.
Okay, cool. Is it so? Okay, so when we double dip under that, or double click underneath that double dip, I don't know where that came from, but when we
Mm-hmm.
double click underneath that, um, we can get into some tactics and some ways, some
Mm-hmm.
resources. But maybe let's start with what is the extended mind?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's a cool phrase.
It is. It is. And I should
Hmm.
say right up front, it is not my idea. I borrowed it from two philosophers. And these two philosophers, Andy Clark and David Chalmers, wrote an article in 1998 that was, interestingly, at the time, was widely sort of mocked and derided. It only later became one of the most cited articles in the philosophy literature, and the model for all kinds of research and ideas that have sprung from the extended mind. But when they first proposed it, people were like, wow, that's crazy. And what they were saying was just what we've been talking about here, that thinking doesn't just happen in the brain, it happens in our bodies, in our spaces, in our relationships, also with our tools, like our devices and our technologies, our analog tools, that we think with those objects as well. And what's interesting is that when they published that article in 1998, the iPhone had not yet been introduced, so they couldn't use that as an example. But once it was introduced, all of us started downloading many of our mental functions to our phones, right? I mean, who remembers phone numbers anymore? Because our phones do that for us. And so slowly, with the introduction of this technology, the idea that thinking doesn't only happen in the brain became more and more plausible. So such that another philosopher, a colleague of David Chalmers, said that the thesis of the extended mind was false when it was written, but later became true. And I think actually the way that we extend our minds with our devices is actually probably the easiest way into understanding this idea, because our devices are really designed to extend our minds, although I would point out that often they don't have that effect. They end up sort of contracting our minds because we get distracted, or they're actually not extending our minds so much as dissipating our mental energy. But I think we all have had that experience of downloading or offloading mental functions onto our devices.
Okay, I want to take a quick little break here to talk about Inside Tracker. Inside Tracker cuts through the noise by analyzing your blood, DNA, lifestyle, fitness trackers, all designed to provide you with a personalized, science-backed, trackable action plan on how to live, age, and perform better in life. And that's my favorite part. They don't just give you data. They actually take the data and apply it in a way to turn it into information, usable information. They actually provide you with nutrition and lifestyle actionable steps that you can take to live well. And if you missed the recent Finding Mastery conversation with Inside Tracker founder and Chief Science Officer, Dr. Gil Blander, I hope you'll check that out. We take a deep dive on longevity and discuss different strategies for not only living longer, but living a higher, richer quality of life. So for a limited time, Inside Tracker is offering us 25% off their entire store. So if you're interested, and I want to encourage you to go check them out, this is a great opportunity to get started. So punch over to insidetracker.com/finding mastery. And it's spelled just like it sounds. Inside, INSIDE, tracker, TRACKER. Insidetracker.com/finding mastery for 25% off. And Finding Mastery is also brought to you by Viori. So Viori makes incredibly soft, comfortable, versatile clothing. And I've said that numerous times. And each time I say it, I've got a couple of my friends in my mind that they say, listen, I heard you talk about Viori on the pod, and I couldn't quite get my arms around like why you were saying they're so comfortable. And then I went and tried them and I bought them, and like it's incredible. And so they just got it right. And it can be used for just about any activity like running or training or yoga, but it's also just great for lounging or weekend errands. So everything is designed to work out in, but it doesn't look or feel that way. Like I said, I absolutely love their clothing. And if you're looking for a great gift for a loved one, I don't think you can go wrong with Viori. I recommend their Ponto short and their Ponto pants. They're awesome. And no matter what your gender is, they've got you covered. Viori has a special offer for us. It's 20% off your first purchase. So get yourself some of the most comfortable, versatile clothing on the planet at vioriclothing.com/finding mastery. So how do you spell it? VUORI, vioriclothing.com/finding mastery. And then not only will you receive 20% off your first purchase, but also enjoy free shipping on any US orders over $75. They've also got you covered with free returns. So it's vioriclothing.com/finding mastery and discover the versatility of Viori clothing. And now let's get right back into the conversation. Very cool. And just as a footnote, David, Dr. Chalmers is foundational in thinking about the hard problem of consciousness. And, when he first introduced his position paper, it was watershed. It was a watershed position paper. And so I love that you're pulling from, foundational philosophical thinking about consciousness and making it really practical, which is, okay, this thing called the smartphone, it's a tool and it's extended your mind. In other words, like a calculator would be a good example in the past, or a sundial might have been, part of the way back in the day, or, it's certainly a smartwatch would be another example. So when you think about, or when you say that we think with our body and we think with our tools, what does it mean to think with our body?
Well, there's, the body is so intimately and intricately connected with the brain. And this is, this is a fact that scientists are elaborating and deepening our knowledge of every day. But that goes against a very old and entrenched idea in our culture that mind and body are separate, and mind is elevated above the body, and the mind is sort of cerebral and pure, and the body is grubby and dirty and irrational and unruly and has nothing to contribute to intelligent thought. But we know that that's incorrect, and that there's so many ways in which the body contributes to the thinking process. One might be, right now as I'm talking, I'm moving my hands around. Gesture, for example, gesture is not just kind of a tag along to speech. It's actually the case that our gestures anticipate what we're thinking and what we're going to say by a few milliseconds, such that by the time we've said something, our hand gestures are already conveying that information. And often our most advanced, our newest and most cutting edge ideas, they show up first in our gestures, and then that kind of informs our own thinking. The real leader in this field is a University of Chicago psychologist named Susan Golden Meadow, a beautiful name. Susan Golden Meadow is a leading researcher in gesture, and she has shown that, for example, when children are wrestling with learning a new concept, often an understanding of the concept will show up first in their hands, even as they're saying what they're saying reflects that old, outdated assumption. And when teachers can be aware of that mismatch between what a student's hands are saying and what they're saying verbally, that is a signal to a teacher that student is ready to make the leap to this new understanding. They're especially receptive to instruction at that moment. And so just paying more attention to what people's gestures are saying, and also encouraging people to make gestures, making a lot of gestures ourselves. All these things move our thinking forward in ways that would not happen if our hands were not moving.
It's confusing to me because I know the value of gestures for communication. And
Mm-hmm.
what I hear you
Mm-hmm.
saying is that we have a thought, and once we have a thought, it actually formalizes in a gesture before we find the right language to express it.
That's right. So it is the case, as you mentioned, that gestures are a very potent tool in communication. Like, people remember what we say, the points that we make when they're accompanied by gesture, more than they remember things that we say when we're not gesturing. So, gesturing is a really powerful way to communicate our ideas to other people. But it's also the case that gesturing is it's part of our own thinking processes and moves our own thinking processes forward, such that the more we gesture, the more fluent our own speech is, the more easily we understand complex concepts. And that's partly because when we're struggling to put words to an idea, often we can capture some element of that with our hands before we're really able to put words to it, as you were saying, Michael. And so it's kind of a bootstrapping thing where, like, our hands give us just a little bit of a leg up, to use an embodied metaphor, and we kind of can build on that to build a more formalized verbal understanding.
It's very cool. And is it a speed? Is it a speed thing that hand gestures come out before the verbal?
Yeah.
There's so many. There's so many words that we can choose to describe something. Even I just
Yeah.
stammered finding the
Yeah.
word. And is it a
Yeah.
speed thing and a rudimentary thing that there's less gestures, maybe, or a smaller range of gestures
Interesting.
than a smaller range of words?
Yeah, or like our hands can move faster than our minds can
Mm-hmm.
create the words. That's a
Right.
that's a good question. I know that
Hmm.
research has found that interacting with objects, like manipulating objects, is actually often a faster way to solve a problem than doing it all in our head. And we have this bias in our culture that real geniuses, real smart people do it all in their head, when really the more you can externalize the thinking process, whether it's gestures or a model that you're actually able to physically manipulate, that kind of thing, that's actually what experts do. That's actually the root of experts mastery, is that they're really good at thinking outside the brain. They're really good at using their bodies, using spaces, using relationships to help their thinking along.
Yeah, it makes sense that when you're holding something that you're trying to solve, that you would actually be pulling in more data points, accessing
Mm-hmm.
different regions of the brain, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
to be
Mm-hmm.
super simple.
Mm-hmm.
But that totally makes sense to me. And
Mm-hmm.
um, we also know that kids, I think it's boys in general, but strike me if I'm wrong on that, or strike this thought if I'm wrong, is that don't strike me. but but boys learn better when they hold something in their hand, and there's a lot of funny
Mm,
jokes that can come from
mm,
that. But I think
mhm,
that
mhm,
I don't know if that still holds true, but I remember reading that at one
mhm,
point.
mhm,
And then I'll tell you a funny story. Is that I was working with a bunch of athletes, and it happened to be a media training day, and the specialist, the expert came in and said, right, okay, let's make sure that you have the right type of eye gaze into the camera. So she was teaching them how to look into the camera. And then make sure you sit on your suit, so the back of your suit, so that your collar doesn't ruffle up.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do that, I want you to tuck your hands underneath your hips and sit on your hands. And I always thought that was really weird. And I thought, well, my Italian ass is going to have a hard time. Like, I'm not sure what I'm going to do here. And so
Yeah.
it
And
felt
stay
really,
like that?
yeah, the whole
Wow.
interview.
Wow.
So, right. And so
No.
it was like, just make it about the eye contact, the words you choose, and have that presence. And don't be flailing and distracting, with hand gestures, was like probably the note that she had received from producers or something. So anyways, I don't know how that went for those athletes, but I always thought it stuck with me that is really odd and confining.
That's misguided. Yeah, I tell a story in the book about Frederick Mishkin, who's a professor at Columbia Business School, and he's a big hand talker and always has been. And when he was in graduate school, his graduate school advisor made him sit whenever he visited his advisor to consult with him about his studies. The advisor forced him to sit on his hands because he found Frederick Mishkin's gestures so distracting or gauche or whatever. And we do have this kind of stigma that we apply to anything that has to do with the body, including gestures, which is it's so wrongheaded. And I think that's true in your example as well, Michael, that gestures are actually part of the thinking process, an integral part of the thinking process. They help us to think better. And so to suppress that it's really a mistake.
We'll leave this point, but I'll share one more misguided bit of advice. And this is why advice, quote unquote, is crazy making to me. It's like half cocked, what kind of worked for me, or I heard it from somebody. Let's get into the science of things and not just this advice giving bit. But it was for a salesperson. I think that this is half true. What I'm about to say. So it was athletes. There's this idea that athletes make good salespeople and good business people because they are self-starters. They know how to work and schedule. They're good teammates. They understand grit and passion, and fill in the blanks with lots of ideas. And some athletes are really long, and so here's where the coaching came in. And again, half cocked, I think it's totally wrong. But this athlete was 6'8". That's a very large human. And the coaching was to keep your limbs in. When you're going to a sales meeting, become smaller a bit, tuck your knees under the table in a way that they're not sprawling, and your 7-foot wingspan is not intimidating people. And so it was more of an intimidation and this creature of an expansion with these long arms that was overwhelming for people. And they were spending more time thinking about how small they were relative to how strong and big this person was. And so the coaching was keep your limbs in. And so I don't know if that really has to do with gestures or not, but just interesting experience. People are different, and we show up differently.
I would say, how much better if that athlete could have been encouraged to own his size and feel empowered, but bring other people into that feeling of empowerment rather than, diminishing himself to make other people feel less small.
That was the tactic. You're so large that you make others feel small. So play small, which is can you imagine telling that to a child?
LeBron James or something.
Or even I don't know if you have kids, but would you ever say that to your kid? I mean,
well, unfortunately, I think girls get told that a lot, that they're
in what way?
That their role is to make other people feel big and strong and to diminish themselves, to keep their voices low, and even to physically, there's all the jokes about man spreading, how men sit on a subway car, and women are kind of much more.
I've heard mansplaining, but not manspreading.
There's manspreading too, where men.
Is this when the hips roll forward and the legs are spread out? Is that what?
And they're taking up way more space than they really need to. So I think there is something about gender that comes into play there too.
Yeah. And while we're on bodies and the thinking and the relationship people have with their bodies, tall people end up not getting hugged in the same,
Interesting.
yet not as often, and not,
Interesting.
because imagine like, and I'm talking extremely tall people, like 6, 7, 8, 9, 7 footers.
Yeah.
It's because when you
Yeah.
hug a 6'8" person or 7 foot person,
You're
which
kind of
they're
like, you're
you're right at their
right. You're,
hip, or it's like, and so they have to come
yeah.
down, and it's a whole
Right.
thing. So
Right.
it's more
Oh,
handshake, fist bumps. Yeah. So imagine growing up and the warmth that we get from hugs that
right.
the 6'4" kid in ninth grade, or 6'3" kid
Yeah.
in ninth grade has. It's just a different relationship with
Yeah. Yeah.
hugging.
Oh,
Anyways, I'm not
that's
sure where we're
funny.
going, but it's interesting.
All this embodied stuff is so interesting because our bodies are with us all the time. And, one thing I write about in the book is this capacity for interoception, which is the flow of sensations that are always there from within our body. But we're really encouraged, especially in situations where we're supposed to be thinking hard and working hard, to push those internal sensations away, which again is a mistake because they carry so much information and so much wisdom if we tune into them.
So, can you define interoception for folks that are not familiar with it? Because it's beautiful. It's not talked about enough. It's
Yeah.
part of an intelligence that happens for people. So, can you quickly just pass over that?
Yeah, I mean, interoception is a term it's a technical term that I had not encountered until I started doing this research. And I think it's the same capacity is much better known under the term gut feelings, And so what it describes is kind of that sensation or feeling you have that is informative, that tells you something, but it doesn't seem to come from your brain or from your conscious mind. And that is in fact the case, that we take in so much information as we're navigating through our everyday lives that we couldn't possibly process and it all on a conscious level. But we are taking in that information. We are noticing patterns and regularities in our experience. And the way we get access to that information is through the body. Like that's what's happening when your stomach, you have butterflies in your stomach, or you feel your heart beating faster. That's your body cluing you in to the fact that here's a situation that you've got to pay attention to. And it's kind of like the body tapping you on the shoulder or tugging you on the sleeve to give you a message. But our culture is so brain centric that we tend to push away those messages and assume that they don't have any relevance.
It's really good. It's a really important part of quote unquote thriving in life, is to
Mm-hmm.
have the ability to be attuned to what the
Mm-hmm.
body is saying, and then having the resources to be able to respond. And
Yes.
so, can we paint a picture really quickly of somebody who, this is like a modern day human right now, that is working their ass off. They're
Mm-hmm.
trying to do their thing, giving their full effort. They're pulled in more directions that they might have wanted, meaning that they're
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
stretched, right? They're
Mm-hmm.
literally at their limits. But
Mm-hmm.
they want to learn, they want to grow, they want to show up, and they want to be right for their family, and or definitely for their career. And they
Yeah.
end up feeling depleted at the
Yeah.
end of the day or the end of the week, or they're just, there's this deep fatigue that's taking place for people. And so,
Yeah.
can you talk about, if you were to be able to help those people, that
Mm-hmm.
person, where
Mm-hmm.
would you start?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, in the book, I write about this technique called the body scan, which those of your listeners who practice mindfulness meditation may have encountered. And it's about bringing open-minded, curious, non-judgmental attention to to whatever is coming up, whatever is being felt in the body. And usually it is a kind of formal practice that you would do before you proceed to do mindfulness meditation. But what I've found, and what researchers have found, is that it can also be done on a much more kind of on the go way, and in a much briefer kind of way, in the sense of just checking in with yourself, and we're so focused on the external world. We're so focused on all this information that's coming at us, that we often forget to check in with what's going on inside. Like, in addition to this very, very vivid and busy external world, there's an internal world as well. And we often are neglecting, that internal world. And so what you want to do ideally is to be drawing from both of those spaces, drawing on what's happening in the external world, but also checking in with what's going on in the internal world. And it only needs to take a moment or two to check in and with yourself and say, how am I feeling? What am I feeling? It's a very helpful to label what you're feeling, to just literally put a name to what you're feeling. And I find that that's something that even very busy people can incorporate into their everyday lives.
Yeah, so it's thin slicing of checking in, and there's good evidence that it works. And what I found is that the person who's highly stressed that isn't practicing in a disciplined way a checking in or a formal meditation process, that they're less likely to check in when their foot is 3/4 of the way down on the pedal. And I think it's really important. And there are ways that we can maybe add to what you just said, which is schedule it. If it doesn't make people's calendars nowadays, it's actually quite tricky. Use your external environment. Maybe this is part of the freeing up, the bandwidth idea that you have of offloading, but using some Post-it notes to check in at different cues throughout their office or home. And you're right that it's a simple breath and a simple labeling. Both have evidence that they dissipate the stress that is experienced or the emotion that is being labeled. So, okay, so great. And now let's get into maybe the 4 ways that you think about offloading. And we've talked about the body. That's I think that's what we just did, right? And there's also technology, physical space, and social interaction.
Yeah.
So can you kind of click through ways that you would help offload from a technology standpoint for the busy, caring human that's trying to do really well in life?
Yeah. So we've talked about how our devices can be very good at offloading our mental functions onto them. But we want to do that really intentionally and skillfully, because our own mental capacities can atrophy, if we hand off too much of that to our devices. Just think about, maybe you've traveled a particular route a whole bunch of times, but you use GPS every time. And if without that GPS, you'd never be able to find your way there. What we really want to do in terms of offloading our mental functions onto our devices is, as much as possible, offload those mundane, routine, kind of everyday kind of mental tasks onto our devices. And in fact, they often do a better job of handling those things than we do. For example, if we put something in Google Calendar, our computer won't misremember it as being Thursday instead of Wednesday. We actually, computers are better than us. It's better than our own brains at doing certain things like keeping information, preserving information in that original state. Whereas our own minds are amazing at sort of elaborating and, transforming things and changing them into new ideas, combining ideas to create something new. And so as much as possible, we want to delegate, the routine stuff to our machines, to our technology, freeing up bandwidth for the stuff that only humans can do, having the big ideas, the creative ideas, making the connections. So that's the most effective way to use our devices.
Okay, let's take a quick little break here to talk about Aura. Aura is a wearable health tech company. I would imagine you know what they are and what they do. It's the tech company that you see folks wear around their finger, their ring. And what they do is they deliver personalized sleep and overall health insights to help you go into each day rested and ready. So what they're doing with this form function on your finger is that the ring is measuring heart rate variability, respiratory rate, skin temperature, and so much more. And they're doing it all from your finger. And I've had a handful of conversations with their lead scientists. I'm bullish on their tech and what they're doing. I'm bullish on where they want to go. And so when it comes to tracking HRV, I want to make sure that I'm getting the most dependable data possible. And I found Oura Ring to be one of the most accurate wearables available right now. It is the first app I open in the day. So after I go through, kind of a wake up morning routine, the first app that I end up checking is Aura. And it's not to see, am I okay? It's to see how intelligent can I be and how calibrated can I be with the way that I feel. And so I love what they're doing. I hope if you take your fitness and wellness and overall health with some seriousness, I think you're going to love this product. I want to encourage you to go check them out. So you can find out more at get.auraring.com/finding mastery. Again, that's get.auraring, and you spell it just like it sounds, OURA, Aura, ring, RING, auraring.com/finding mastery. I also want to talk to you about Hyperice. Hyperice is a wellness tech company that makes devices designed to help you move better. And they are known for their award-winning Hypervolt. It is the world's most powerful percussion massage device featuring Quiet Glide technology. And I will tell you, they are in just about every locker room that I've ever been in. And the reason being is because the products that they have, like the vibrating foam roller, they've got thermal technology to help warm and cold. They've got Normatec compression systems. All of their products are dynamic. And so for folks that their business is their body, they take it seriously. And this is available to you as well. And so if you're sitting all day, that is wreaking havoc on your body. If you're not moving the way you want to move, that is a strain on your body. Yes, it is a strain on your body if you're not moving enough. And the same is true if you're overtraining. And anywhere in between, making sure that you have a relationship with your body, this is one of the ways that technology can help you. And basically what they help you do is to recover quickly, simply move better, maybe even warm up faster. I've used Hyperice Tech for years. I love what they're doing. I want to encourage you to go check them out. You can learn more at hyperice.com, and that's spelt HYPERICE, hyperice.com. And now let's get right back into the conversation. Calendaring is an easy one. Maybe we can double click on some other ones that you found to be useful for you and maybe useful for others.
Yeah, well, memory in general, this goes back to our earlier conversation about how the biological brain is quite limited. We're not really good at remembering exact information. That the brain extracts the gist from a situation, and we kind of remember basically what something was about. But a computer is very good at remembering exactly what the details are, and those details don't change. So a lot of those functions that we'd want to download to our devices really do have to do with memory, and a very precise and exact kind of memory.
Okay, very cool. And I think we're hitting on a couple of them, right? With the physical space, like, is that Post-its like I was talking about, or are there other ones that you would say using your physical space as a way of offloading is important?
Yeah, well, there is the space of ideas, which is what I mean when I talk about getting stuff out of your head, ideas and information out of your head and onto physical space, whether that's like a giant whiteboard or a bunch of Post-it notes that you can actually manipulate as if they're physical objects, or navigate through as if it's like a three-dimensional landscape. Those are all things that our brains do really effortlessly and easily. And it draws on these embodied resources that come so naturally to us, that we use so effectively, but that don't even get activated if we keep all that information and all those ideas inside our head. But I also mean literally physical space, as in spending lots of time outdoors, because it turns out that being indoors and focusing on very intently on the kind of concepts and symbols that make up most of our work is very draining, to our attentional systems. Whereas going outside and having that kind of pleasantly diverting experience of just looking here and there, and like not having that really intense drawdown on your attention, that restores your attentional faculties. So then you can go back to your office with greater focus and greater attentional ability.
And the research is phenomenal about, like, outside is ideal, wide open spaces, wide, big ideas, if you will, but wide open spaces is really important. And then not necessary, like there would be, that for me this is why I grew up surfing, and I loved two aspects of surfing. It was like super vast. And then also you could find details and narrowing of details in the rippling of the top of the water, the shimmering of the light. Like you can go back and forth between the two, which was really, I think, an interesting aspect. And plus the magnesium the kind of the salt air, the
Really?
ions there. Yeah, there's
Oh,
like
you're
some really
making it sound so cool.
it's really an amazing thing. And then there's risk and learning, and it's complicated because
Mhm.
it's always new. It's like for a lot of reasons, it's amazing. Um,
Yeah.
okay, so big spaces,
Hmm.
and then the research is really interesting. Is that if you can't get big spaces, like okay, be outside in some respects, and then if you can't do that, be at near a window
Hmm.
that can see nature,
Yeah.
and then the least effective but still effective is a
Hmm.
picture of nature that's hanging on your wall.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
isn't
Yeah.
that
Or
what?
bringing in plants and greenery into our, or even natural motifs into our built settings can be helpful.
It's
Yeah.
How do you explain that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, human beings evolved in the outdoors. This life we live where we're indoors, inside buildings or inside our cars 90% of the time, that is a very recent development if you look at the whole span of human history. So our perceptual faculties are tuned to what we see in the organic world, in the natural world. And a lot of the sharp edges and loud sounds and fast moving objects that we confront like in an urban setting, those are stressful. They put a real stress on our nervous system, and being outside is really it's kind of the sweet spot for our brain. It's very easy to process, for our brains to process that information, and what our brains find easy to process we generally find pleasant. So that's why when we go outside, most of us feel a kind of lifting of our mood every time we just step out the door.
Yeah, so this ancient brain of ours, hasn't quite caught up to some of the modern stressors. And so your tactics are about taking advantage of the true ancient nature and
Right.
the modern research and inventions that can work in harmony, which is the extended mind, if I have it
Mm-hmm.
correctly.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and then the fourth is social interaction. So what do you mean
Mm-hmm.
by social
Mm-hmm.
interaction?
Yeah, well, so I find it interesting that again, this book is as much a work of cultural criticism as anything else, and I find it really interesting that in our culture, in our society, we tend to separate social life from the life of the mind. Our workplace or our professional lives, like they're different and they're even at odds. Like we might think of having a drink after work, but then when we're actually at work, we need to focus and turn off that social part of our brain.
Oh, so we're
But
drinking at work now? Is that a good, is that good?
I,
Is there good research?
that's,
The team would love it.
I
Like,
won't
yeah,
argue
okay.
against that. Yeah. No, but I
Yeah.
mean, humans are fundamentally social creatures. We're social all the time, not just
Hmm.
during happy hour. And so the more we can harness our really powerful social brains in the service of thinking and learning and doing our work, the more effective we can be. So social activities like telling stories or debating other people or teaching other people, those activate cognitive processes that remain dormant when we're just thinking alone by ourselves. So I think we should bring a lot, whether it's drinking or not, I think we should bring a lot more of our social selves into our work.
Okay. So best practice for social interaction, scheduling, trying to be clever and like, offloading onto whatever calendar that you're using, and being in person outside and with others. Are we talking about like the trifecta or the quad of
Yeah,
offloading and
yeah.
extended mind? Hmm.
Well, and we haven't even talked about the value of physical activity for thinking, but
Right.
when
Yeah.
you can be active, physically active outside with a friend, that's like the ideal. I think you're hitting like every every sweet spot there.
And then do you have a recommendation for if somebody is working, 12-hour day, 8-hour day, whatever it might be, and they're inside for most of it, a
Hmm.
best practice that you found to be important for you on the relationship between inside and outside?
Yeah. Well, as we were saying, even looking out the window, research finds that even looking out the window for at a scene of greenery for 40 seconds, as little as 40 seconds, can refresh that attentional capacity. And also, I suggest to people that instead of, when you have a break in work, not turning to Twitter and not turning to the news, which is really going to, if anything, will bring you down, but watching a nature video instead. And it's actually, I do it myself, and it's actually incredibly, it kind of puts you back in touch with the fact that we live in this big world. We are animals ourselves, and it's very easy to get caught up in the day's debate, but to step back and have the bigger view, I think can be really useful.
And are you doing that every hour, every 45 minutes, every 3 hours, once a day? Like how do you do
Uh-huh.
it? And I know that
Yeah.
you would probably, I will talk about sunlight in a minute, vitamin
Hmm.
D, magnesium, sunlight, for just a
Hmm.
moment. But can you talk about like the cadence?
Yeah, I mean, again, the brain bound, which is a word the philosopher Andy Clark uses that I really like. The brain bound notion of how you get work done is that you sit there until you finish. You keep working your brain, and a lot of us have operated that way during the pandemic because we've been at home. We haven't been commuting. We don't have coworkers around to chat with. And so we just sit there and we work. And I think the limitations of that approach have become apparent over the last 18 months. So it can seem counterintuitive, but to take breaks and breaks of a particular kind can make you more productive, and breaks of a particular kind where you're tuning into your body, having an experience with nature, an encounter with nature, or connecting with another person, like making sure those things happen. That's how I try to structure my workday, so that I'm not just using my brain for hours on end, but I'm breaking it up with these specific kinds of experiences.
Okay. If leaders, thoughtful leaders, of course, knew what you knew,
Mm-hmm.
how would they how would they set the external conditions and best
Mm-hmm.
practices for people to be their very best?
Yeah, I love that question because I really think the extended mind proposes a new role for leaders and managers, that they're really situation creators. They're creators of settings and environments where people can do their best thinking. And though a situation like that, one that is most amenable to intelligent thinking, I think would make lots of space for physical activity, would allow people to take those moments to check in with their introspective selves, would have lots of light and fresh air and access to the outdoors, and would also make space for social activity. People engage, again, we're so fundamentally and naturally social. People engage in activities like storytelling and teaching other people just when they're given space to do so. They don't even really need to be instructed to do that. They just need space and time, and the understanding that those things will actually make everybody more productive and more effective. It's not at all a waste of time, quite the opposite.
Mm, I love it. What are you still searching for? You've written a book that is
Mm,
hopefully going to change folks.
mm,
You said you wrote it because you needed
mhm,
it. And
mhm, mhm.
so now that you've put it down and you're sharing it with us,
Yeah,
what are you still searching for? What's
yeah,
next?
yeah. One thing I became very aware of while writing this book was how much the richness of the raw materials that we have to think with, how much that informs how well we're able to think. And that's not something we take into account in our current system, where we judge people and we rank people based on supposedly what they're doing, up here with their heads, when really so much of their performance has to do with their access to rich materials with which to think. So to me, this is the new kind of frontier of equality and inequality, to say, well, really, what materials do people have to think with? And it, isn't it the case that there's huge disparities in our culture and in the raw materials with which people have to think with? So I've been very fortunate to have the freedom to think well, the mentors and peers to think well with. All those things have space and time to think with, and all those things have informed my own thinking so much. And so I want to explore that question of equality and inequality in terms of our mental extensions.
Very cool. Yeah, the great digital divide is certainly one that
Yes.
is easy to think about.
Yeah.
Outdoors, if you're kind of city bound or indoor bound,
Right.
I guess parks are good. They don't feel the same to me as being in the
Yeah.
mountains or the ocean, or
Yeah.
a landscape that is expansive. But maybe, there's interesting research. I'm I'm hesitant to even bring up research around grounding or earthing, because it's, at least I haven't seen the robustness of it. But
Mm-hmm.
as an N of one, as a person, I feel it. I notice that I'm different when my feet are in the sand or my feet are in the
Mm-hmm.
grass. I
Mm-hmm.
feel differently.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but the
Mm-hmm.
research, I haven't seen it where it's like a dramatic, like, hey, make sure this happens on a daily basis. But maybe somebody in the community will point me to better research than I've looked at there. Okay, so all that being said is,
Mm-hmm.
if we could be really concrete, what's one thing that you want to pass to the next generation?
Mm.
If your work is to live on, and they were to just hold it up and to say, and there was just one thing
Hmm.
for the next generation, what do you hope? And maybe it's not in the
Mm-hmm.
book. It doesn't have to be in the book.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Hmm. I think the theme of all of my work has been you are not who your society or your culture tells you you are, that there are lots of pressures and forces and incentives to tell you who you are so that you'll be a better consumer or a better worker, or fit into society's idea of what a human should be. But it's your job in the biggest, broadest sense to figure out who you really are. And, to go back, Michael, to your question of what am I still searching for? I'm still searching at bottom for what is true self, what is truly your authentic self, and what is all the stuff that gets put on you. And I'm always kind of looking to discover what that is.
This is where mindfulness is really important
Mm.
as a practice. This is where journaling is important. And the third component is conversations with people of wisdom,
Mm-hmm.
that are not looking at the surface, but looking at the depths of the human experience, and potentially you individually, the depths of you. And true self is it's not a word that it gets thrown around a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not a word that is easily defined.
Mm.
And I think that best self, authentic self, true self, they sound like they're the same, but they're actually quite different. And
Mm.
so, yeah, um, this is a recent conversation that I had on the podcast, where we're talking about true self being, what's actually more interesting about that phrase is S with a capital S, like the true
Mm.
self of what it means to be fully
Mm.
human.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the unifying field bit, like the common thread that we all have. What are those common threads? And then best self is like, wherever you are today, can there's a first principle that we're all working to be our very best, with the best that we have available
Mm-hmm.
in
Mm-hmm.
each moment that we are, engaged in. But we don't have necessarily the internal resources to be our very best.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because
Mm-hmm.
to your point in your research here, that our brains and our minds are limited,
Yeah.
and we need to offload and recover properly, and strain in a healthy way, and not
Mm-hmm.
overextend, on the
Mm.
extended mind, but to do it in a healthy way. So I think
Mm-hmm.
those are really important
Mm-hmm.
ways for people to wrestle. What is authentic self? What is true self? And what is best
Mm-hmm.
self?
And I think the question too is so interesting. What is universal? What is shared? What is human nature? And then what is unique and, really characteristic of yourself and no one else? That's a really interesting place to vein to work.
Yeah, that's really good. And it sounds like, you are highly attuned to consciousness and the value of it, and the mind, if you will, in general. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if you're familiar with Hoffman's work. We've had Hoffman on the podcast.
Mm-mm.
Have you been exposed? Okay, he's
I'm not.
phenomenal. And then
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Tony Nader.
Hmm.
Tony Nader might be somebody that I think you might be interested in as well. He's a deep, rich thinker. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so there might be some fun places to go
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
But
Thanks for pointing me in that direction.
both wrestling with the hard problems of consciousness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, now, just for fun, if you were to
Mm-hmm.
sit with a master, a true master,
Uh-huh.
and you had one question, this is like definitely a reductionist, idea, but like,
Uh-huh.
or format. But if you were to sit with one master and you had one question, who would it be, and what would it be?
I think, okay, since I mentioned him before, I'm going to say Sigmund Freud again. I'd love
You
to
go
bring
back to
him.
Freud. Yeah. Oh my God.
I
Yeah.
find the psychodynamic approach to understanding human beings. As you were saying, it's more of an art than a science, but I think it has so much to contribute to our understanding of ourselves. And I would want to sit with Sigmund Freud and say, when you look into the human soul, what do you see? I just think he had unparalleled capacities for observing and seeing deeply within people. And I'd want to know, when you listened, when you invented this amazing method of just allowing people to talk, and so much comes out, and there's so much rich material there, like, what are you looking for? What are you listening for?
Oh, that is cool. That is really cool. I love this conversation. I'm stoked to introduce your work to our community. And here's one more reductionist idea, but you can take it wherever you want.
Okay.
How do you finish this thought? It all comes down to
knowing yourself.
And your best practices for that are?
Well, for sure, interoceptive attunement, but a lot of introspection. I mean, I'm still pretty brain bound as a person. I have an analytical mind, and I use it. So I think, the value of self-examination is there's not enough of it in this world. And I think there should, I think it can show you things about yourself that you really need to know if you're, and it takes some courage and some bravery to do that too, I think.
Incredible courage. I love where you go with this. And do you do that with somebody, or do you do it for meditation and or journaling or some other form?
All of the above. I mean, I'm a huge fan of therapy, and I have a wonderful therapist, and I love reading books about therapy. But also, it's kind of a life project. It's one continuous conversation with myself and with the books I read and with my friends and with my therapist. So it's all just trying to figure out, like, what's it all about?
And are you doing psychodynamic work yourself, or is it something
Yes.
else?
Yes. Yeah. Kind of these days, a lot of therapists have an eclectic kind of approach rather than a very dogmatic kind of one. And I would describe that as the kind of work that I'm doing.
And so your form of therapy, you're not, transference and countertransference are part of the equation, meaning that
that happens. That's a real thing.
Yeah, your therapist is not sitting behind you and like,
no, I'm not
just
lying on a
listening to the
couch.
words.
No. Yeah. Although I was once told by another therapist that I was a good candidate for psychoanalysis, and for years I've wondered, is that a compliment, or is that
what does that mean?
So messed up that you need to be in here 5 days a week, or is it like, oh, you're so thoughtful and introspective, you could really I would go that
way. Yeah, I would go that way. Yeah, very cool. What super fun. Is there anything that we didn't hit on that you'd say, I wish we would talk a little bit more about this aspect, or I want to encourage people this way, or is there something that is meaningful that we didn't get to?
Yeah, maybe I could just say something that might seem like it's from out of left field, which is a lot of, there's such a Buddhist flavor to the extended mind, which, and I'm very interested in Buddhism, but and it's not mentioned anywhere in the book, but I think some readers have felt that and have seen the connections. And I feel like there's been a real undercurrent of Buddhism to this conversation, like our discussion about true self and of course meditation and mindfulness. And so I would just encourage, if anybody has ever had, any of your listeners have ever had a stirring of interest in Buddhism, to look into that. I think there's such amazing wisdom there that we in the West could really benefit from, and it's certainly changed my own life.
Oh, so you are practicing Buddhism yourself?
I'm so averse to being part of any kind of a group that I would never say I'm a Buddhist, but I'm very interested in Buddhist thought, and I read a lot about it and practice meditation. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there a particular form of meditation that you're experiencing now or has been meaningful to
you? Again, the concept of awareness and of identifying with awareness rather than with all these things that, again, society tells you are, allows me to get down to some kind of core, some kind of universal Buddha nature. And I think that that's part of this question we've been debating about: what is universal, what is human nature, and what is our own, particular and contingent take on it, but awareness is the key, I think. There's a story about the Buddha that he encountered someone walking on the road, and this person was struck by the amazing sort of aura around the Buddha and said, "Who are you?" And the Buddha said, "I'm awake." And that was his answer. And I just think that's so beautiful, to like be awake and to have that be the core of your identity. I think that's something to strive for.
It's really cool. And, it is the practice of working to know all there is to know and to experience it in complete awareness. And the idea that you can be tapped into this unifying field, to the collective conscious, to like the thing of the mind that is universal is remarkable. And we felt it. People have, we just not as an extended experience. And so it's quite remarkable. And I think all 11 world religions have done something pretty special, and many of them something pretty egregious, but pretty special in trying to understand what happens, the best way of living according to insight and some practices, and then a best way of understanding what happens after physical death. And what I find fascinating is that they keep coming down to the at least one of the two words that you mentioned at the top about, work and love. Love is a through line in all of them. And so it feels like whether it's Buddhism or Christianity, and Jesus was beautiful example of personified love, and strength. And I can go down the list. I'm fascinated with all 11 world religions. I think that they're I don't know. It just feels like it's a source code that is not quite unified. And I think you and I would agree that on this point that I've got problems with the dogma and the rules. And if Christianity, this is going to sound, I'm going to piss people off when I say this. I say this to my mom all the time, and I know it's a sore spot, but if Christianity were an institution in the United States, we'd shut that thing down. Right? You abuse kids, you do that. And I mean, if this was a university, that university would be shut down. I don't know if you can come back from those egregious behaviors. And I know I just pissed off a bunch of folks in here. But that's not to say that I don't find the principles of the man and the Trinity to be amazing. And so anyways.
This has been really fun talking with you, Michael.
Yeah, I've appreciated it. And so where can people find you? Where's the best place to connect people to your work?
Yes. So I have a website that's www.anniemurphypaul.com. I'm also really active on Twitter, and I love engaging with people there. And my handle there is @AnnieMurphyPaul.
Okay, awesome. And then I want to encourage people to go check out the book. We will have notes in the show notes and links for everybody, and look forward to seeing you on social as well.
Great. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you.